I have the thought for the day. So I was reading in New Yorker magazine about this famous director, and he was directing people in a play on Broadway, and he told his actors, if you get lost, drown in the other's eyes. So it's talking about, if you lose your place in the play or you can't remember your lines, he's talking about that. But he says, drown in the other's eyes. And I thought, I'm not even sure what that means, but I kind of like it. So, and if you get lost, because we're always getting lost. So I buried a homie I knew for over 30 years, Caesar, who died suddenly in Mexico. I buried him on Saturday. And he was just a totally loving guy and always affectionate and always anchored and loving. And he would always end every conversation with a big hug, and he'd say with kind of an accent, I love you too much, un chingo, and a little bit more tomorrow. He'd say that every single time. He discovered, for all his struggles, he discovered that if you're self-absorbed, you'll be sad. If you focus on the other, you'll be happy. But if you love being loving, you'll be joyful. He knew this for all his struggles. And that's what it means to drown in the other's eyes. So I remember years and years ago, there was a homie I knew named Speedy who was getting ready to say Mass at Dolores Mission. I was pastor then, and he came into the sacristy and he leaned on the countertop and he says, you know what, G, I just don't care whether I live or die. And I thought, well, son, I have Mass right now, but it's going to have to do for you to know that I care whether you live or die. And that seemed to work. Well, later that night, in those days, I always had an open door policy. So if I was working in my office, front door was always open and directory, and homie could just come in. So he sees that I'm there around 8:30, and he comes to me and he stands over my desk and he says, please, I don't want your forehead to turn red at what I'm about to tell you. And of course, the reddening begins. And he says, I walked Anna home tonight. This was earlier in the afternoon. I walked Anna home. I said, no. So Anna was a young girl who he was sprung on in, and she lived in his enemy's worst enemy's part of the housing projects in Aliso Village. So he walks her home, he tells me, he deposits her on the second floor, and then he walks down the stairs, and then he's surrounded by like 10 guys from an enemy neighborhood, and they chase his ass around Aliso Village housing projects. And this is an old story, so there were no guns, but they were throwing rocks and sticks and empty 40-ounce bottles of beer. And finally, they don't call him Speed for nothing, so he lost him, and so he gets away. And he's at First Street, he's about to cross the street to relative safety when he runs into a woman named Yolanda. And Yolanda doesn't really know him, except she knows that he shouldn't be where he currently is. And so she calls him over, ven para acá, come here. And he walks over to her and she says, Mijo, ¿qué está haciendo aquí? What are you doing here? And he kind of bows his head with some embarrassment. And then she chooses to drown in the other's eyes. She says, if anything ever happened to you, it would break my heart in two. I've seen you in the park playing with your nephew. What a good uncle you are. I've seen you feed the homeless at Dolores Mission Church. What a kind and generous thing that is. But then she returns to the earlier refrain and she says, pero te digo una cosa, if anything ever happened to you, it would break my heart in two. So vete a la casa. And so he comes to my office eventually that evening, and he tells me that story. And he says, you know what? That shit made me feel good. And that's the sound of a human being loving, and deciding to drown in the other's eyes. So if you ever get lost, that's how you find your way home.